Welcome back, everyone, to Today I Learned Bitcoin, where you come to learn Bitcoin with us. Pretty simple. We're here to talk about how you can't change Bitcoin. Bitcoin actually changes you. It's a really common theme you'll hear amongst the Bitcoin community, and it had me reflecting quite a bit recently. Just working and talking with my co-host Jason, he entered down the rabbit hole. If you guys listened to our first episode a little over 6 months ago, I believe, and it's been truly amazing, like watching his journey along this process, because I can see that it's kind of starting to change the way that he thinks and how he views life. That's something I even noticed just from a third party perspective. So what we're going to do today is actually talk to Jason about, what has changed since going down this rabbit hole. Because it is truly, a life changing event once you actually understand, you know, there's a problem with money, what the history was, like how did we get here, and understanding the fact that Bitcoin is a solution. It's it's an option to opt out of all these issues that we're facing with our money today. So excited to dive into that. Stoked to bring up Jason. Let's get him on. What's up, Jason? How are you today?
Alec, what is up, my dude? I am super, super pumped to go over this topic. To our viewers and listeners, guys, it's kind of funny. Alec and I did this episode once already, and we kind of reflected on that episode, and we were like, man, there's so much to say about this, about the way Bitcoin changes you and your outlook on so many different aspects of life, money included. And so we actually decided to go and break this down into like topical episodes. So what we're going to talk about today is kind of like in my journey, the first step in Bitcoin adoption was recognizing that there's this huge, huge problem with our current monetary system. So we're going to talk about how broken that system is. We're going to kind of look at the history of money over, a long time and kind of compare that to what we have today. And of course, bring it back full circle to Bitcoin. Alec, thanks for having me, dude.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for being here and just talking about Bitcoin with me, man. I love it. It's the best time. So, I mean, kind of where I think we should start, like we mentioned, just understanding that there's a problem with money. I'm curious, at what point did you start to, understand that? And like, what were you feeling? What were you going through, as you realized, hey, like, this shit's kind of fucked up right now, right?
Yeah, dude, 100%. I mean, at first, like, again, and I said this in kind of like our very first episode, but I was a bit of a crypto bro. I was a degen. I think that's a stage a lot of us go through on the way to Bitcoin adoption. But as I started talking to you more and kind of like realizing that there is an isolation of Bitcoin from the rest of the crypto community, and in fact, Bitcoin's not even crypto when you really get to it, but that's a different conversation. I started to look at the bigger picture of like, okay, so Bitcoin is its own thing. It's a solution to a problem. I want to better understand the problem. And I began feeling the problem all around me. And in that kind of like phase, I realized I'd always felt a lot of this. And I think a lot of us are. So some of the things I took note of, right? Like I'm in my 30s. I'm not a homeowner yet. I didn't buy in previous years. And we all know how the US housing market is. So, like, I have this kind of like underlying anger that I'm in my 30s and I really can't buy a home at any kind of a reasonable price right now. So I'm kind of stuck in this like renting loophole. I kind of like I looked inward and I kind of identified like a hopeless feeling because it doesn't seem to ever get better, right? We hear a lot of politicians rattling off about potential solutions. And Alec, like, do the solutions ever make sense, dude? Right? Like they don't because all of the verbiage they use is wildly complex and it's intentional, right? We're not supposed to really understand a lot of this. We're supposed to just trust the process and trust our leaders to figure it out. And they're fucking not. They're not figuring it out. They're nowhere close to it. So there's kind of a mistrust in politicians that like started to kind of like swell up, right? And yeah, I mean, that led to a lot of other questions, right? Looking at inflation, it's like, is my retirement account, is my IRA going to outpace the inflation? right? Is my salary really keeping me above water? Like, what does my salary today mean in relation to what it might have meant 10 years ago? In fact, Alec, why don't you go ahead? We did kind of an interesting experiment here on a .gov website with an inflation calculator. Go ahead and pull that up, dude.
Let
Let's
me
take a look at
lock
this.
that up here.
Okay, so this is interesting because I know for me personally, like getting to that line of, a salary that was in the six figures, I think for a lot of people is like a really like lofty goal. It always was for me. And so I started playing around with this and so did Alec. And we were just like, all right, so what does it take to get to like what $100,000 salary means today? What did that mean just a short while ago? So I think we're all comfortable and kind of desensitized to this idea that money today is not, it doesn't equate to what it did 50, 60, 70 years ago. But let's look at the short term here. So what we see here is just in 2010, in just 2010, right? First Obama term, today's $100,000 salary would have meant 71.5 13 years ago. Like holy shit, dude, right? So that's what I'm talking about. Like looking into these things, it becomes more and more infuriating and more of an emotional journey that's painful at parts, really, when you see stuff like this.
Yeah, I mean, if you didn't get a raise, since 2010, or honestly, if you're not consistently getting a raise, well above, what is that, like 20%? I'm terrible at doing math on the spot, but you're actually, getting a pay cut essentially because your money's just not going as far as it used to in the past, right? And I think
Yeah.
everyone's feeling that at this point. Something you brought up kind of at the beginning there was, it kind of took looking into Bitcoin to have that realization. Everyone's just kind of running on autopilot. It is what it is. This is the system that, we have that without an understanding that there's an alternative, you just kind of, play in the rat race. How can I achieve, I've hit the 100,000, mile mark. Now I need to achieve more and more and more and more and more, right? It's really just the consumption system that we're built in. There's no incentive to save money because it literally melts. If you had that $100,000, sitting in the bank in 2010, it's not going to buy, $30,000 haircut. Essentially, it's not going to buy the same amount of things that it used to. So why would you just keep it in a bank, right? And
Right.
I wish there was just an easy way, knock someone over the head, just shake them, whatever you need to realize, like, hey, there's a problem with the money. Look into it. You know, Bitcoin is a solution, which I wouldn't even push into Bitcoin first, right? Your kind of process here. So, like, you started looking into it because I was like, hey, check out Bitcoin. It's different from crypto. That had you looking at, oh crap, like, my money, what am I doing with it? Where did this come from? I don't know if at this point, like, segue to you actually diving into, what is money, right? Was that kind of the next step in the process?
Yeah, that was the next step. So, and this is great, dude. When you talking about grabbing people by the shoulders and shaking them, like that's what we're doing here, guys. That's what this is all about. We're going to talk about the money in this episode. In the following one, we're going to talk about Bitcoin as a solution. So we're going to go very step by step here in kind of a reflection of my own journey. But yeah, going from like, okay, this is fucked. There's a problem. And guys, I want to emphasize one more time what we just looked at. What when Alex shared his screen, that was a government website. That was a .gov website. This isn't some tinfoil hat like some Bitcoin bro threw together, a calculator that may or may not be accurate. That's the .gov website. Okay,
You
so
can
this is
tell.
very yeah because it looked like shit.
Exactly. Looks like Windows 2000. That's how you can tell.
Yeah. But this is my point is like a quick Google search gets you to that site, and there's a million of them, but it's readily public information. Okay, so yeah, going from there, it's like and I think we could also talk a little bit, Alec. I've talked with you about like checking your financial privilege and the recognition that like as ugly as that is, that number we just looked at, that's what we face here in the U.S. you actually threw some pretty staggering numbers at me, right? Like, why don't you talk a little bit about like some of these other inflation rates super quick that we see globally happening that are just crippling and destroying lives, and then we can kind of bring it back to like a quick history of the money, which is kind of the next stage that I went through. But I
Yeah.
think it's worth touching on that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most people probably really aren't aware. I just pay attention to this stuff because, I'm into Bitcoin and I'm paying attention to money. But obviously we have inflation in the US. You feel it at the gas pump, at the grocery store, your rent, house prices, right? It's a pain. We can still live day to day though without it being a major impact. We don't have to think about the inflation on a day-to-day basis, but there's multiple countries out there right now that are dependent upon the US dollar, and the fact that we continuously print money, makes their money actually continue to decrease in value. So, countries like Argentina, they just hit 110% inflation. Like, how would you feel if your money last year was the value was cut in half, more than half, right? That's an insane feeling. Like these people, as soon as they get paid, their money is decreasing in value at such a rapid rate. They have to go spend it immediately or go invest it in something immediately, convert it, which there's a ton of things that make it very difficult for them to do so along those lines. But Argentina's one example. Everyone knows Venezuela, their currency has been completely trashed over the years, like thousands of percent inflation. Another recent one being Lebanon, well over 200% inflation as well. The last figure I had here was 264%, and they're putting bans on cash, limiting withdrawals from banks. Banks are completely closing and not giving people money. There was even some news stories that came out of people basically robbing a bank for their own money. It's not really robbery. They just had to go in there and force
Forcefully take
them
it.
to get their
Yeah.
money, paying doctor bills or anything in an emergency. They need to feed their family, right? Things come up, and it's just crazy to see that, you know, we have this solution out there. Everyone's pretty blind to it, especially in the United States. But if you're in these other countries, you definitely understand this problem. You feel it on an every single day basis, or at least every single time you get a paycheck, right? Because if it's going to be cut in half, in the next couple months here, you definitely need to do something with that immediately. Like your prices in the grocery store changing on a daily basis. It's just not something we feel in the US. So, there's an awesome book out there called Check Your Financial Privilege. I haven't yet dove into it, just read kind of the spark notes on it, but yeah, I mean it's all about this topic. I definitely look forward to diving into that further for sure.
100%, dude. And I think we do feel it here, but it's very gradual, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like it takes us a few years to be like, hold up, what's going on, right? The gas stuff we pay pretty close attention to, but we usually attribute it mistakenly to like, and this goes with inflation in general, we attribute it to whoever's ass is in the Oval Office.
All
Well,
those
you know what's
freaking Biden stickers on the gas pumps.
yeah, they came and then they went, right? And now they're showing up again. And it's funny because when we look at that span of 2010 to 2023 that we just looked at that you pulled up, that covers two distinct administrations, right? Well,
Yeah.
now three, but it covers Obama, it covers Trump, and now it covers Biden. Guess what? All three are adding trillions to the balance sheet. All of them. So this is not like a Republicans versus Democrats thing, right? Like Joe Biden happens to be presiding over some nasty inflation right now. This is a fact, right? But Donald Trump presided over 2020, in which trillions were added to the balance sheet in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. So, like, guys, it's everybody. You can't just look at the small, narrow picture of like, oh, the inflation's bad. Who's the president and make it about your political agenda. It's a bigger thing than that. So that kind of brings me to the next thing, and we'll get moved on, past this in a sec. But real quick, like, why would we go and print money? Right? We're making this claim that the government's printing money, and well, actually. Alec, why don't you? I think we have something a little entertaining we can show these guys on that note, the government printing money. Get that clip pulled up, dude, and then I'll
Yeah.
continue my spiel. You guys are gonna love
So
this.
this is a video that came out probably a week or two old at this point. Representative Brad Sherman had this thing went pretty viral. So if you haven't seen it yet, you're gonna get a kick out of this. Let's watch it.
Crypto bros make money literally by making money, and they've made over $1 trillion out of thin air. They'll accuse the U.S. government of making money out of thin air. Maybe we do, but we're the U.S. government. Crypto bros make money
Oops.
literally by making money, and they've made.
So
Oh my
crazy, man.
god, dude. It's like you can't stop watching it. It's laughable, but it's not at the same time. Like holy shit. You think he knew in that moment where you think he said that and he was like, "Oh fuck." Like
Probably
immediately
not.
after.
Probably
No,
not. He
because he
seemed
hasn't.
very convicted in what he was saying. Like, we have the right to print money. We are the US government. You peons need to not do this. It's only our job to print money. Right? He said it
Yeah,
with some strong conviction, that smile at the end, just his little smirk. There's no way that, he's just coming to flex, the power of the US government. We, are almighty powerful. We're going to print
we
money.
can do it. We can do it. Yeah,
You
yeah.
can't
What
opt
a
out of our system and use these other, cryptos or whatever they want to label them as, right?
what
So, it's absolutely mind-blowing, man. Like, I don't know why we accept these types of representatives. I don't know why we accept the fact that the government can just print money that we work every single goddamn day for, right? Why is it free for them to make more of? Just doesn't make
yeah.
sense.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us know that the government prints money and we do accept it because it's been so normalized and we accept inflation and we accept like hearing that the target is 2% per year and we're like, "Oh, that's good. If we get down to 2%, that's good." No, it isn't. No, inflation is good because it means your money's devalued, right? But it's so normalized. But anyways, to bring it back, like what are some of the, I guess, justifications? In my mind, there are no justifications, but some of the justifications and reasoning that the government uses to print money are, to be more appealing in terms of like importing and exporting, right? Like pretty much and I'm not going to get too much into the economist stuff because I don't know it that well, to be honest. But
Mhm.
my understanding is like people, politicians, presidents, prime ministers, they intentionally devalue their currency in an effort to make exporting our goods look more attractive, right? If our currency is weaker in relation to another country's currency, they're going to come shop here for our goods. We're going to export our goods there. And that looks good on our economy, right? And of course, we prop up the stock market, right? We saw this happen in COVID. Trillions of dollars printed in COVID. Some of it going to stimmy checks, $1,000, right, or whatever it was, 1,200. But a lot of it shooting, just injecting money into the stock market as it's failing, and just bringing it right back up where it needs to be. Bailing out banks, right? Loaning out a shitload of money to corporate banks. And lastly, and most importantly, right, that this is the real heavy hitter. Governments devalue money steadily to incentivize, Alec, you touched on this, to incentivize spending over saving and to keep things in terms of a high time preference, right? If I know that my dollars are going to be worth less next year than they're worth now, I'm going to go out into the US economy and spend my dollars, right? Because those goods that I'm buying, they're going to be more expensive a year from now. And I know that, right? They don't want you saving. And what's interesting is if you go open a savings account at JP Morgan or Wells Fargo, most of these savings accounts, maybe they kick you 1% back or 0.5% or something menial like that. Guess what? It's under 2%. And so while you're
Still no.
making some money, quote unquote, making some money and earning interest or whatever on your savings account, it's not outpacing the inflation rate and you're not incentivized to save. So, how do you outpace it? you become a fucking stock expert, I guess, right? Now you have to figure out how to become an expert in investing in stocks. And again, the government very much wants the stock market to be pumped full of money. So when you start to understand the reasoning behind it, it's a lot less like tinfoil hat sounding of like, well, the government prints a bunch of money so they can control you. I mean, that's the broad statement. That's the truth. But there are these underlying reasons, right? It's also to fund wars. Like, how do you think wars are funded? By printing a shitload of money. So, anyways, to
Yeah, I
move
mean,
on from that, no, go ahead, man.
it's all in the name of economic expansion, right? This is going to be great. Everybody's going to prosper. Our country's going to grow. The only thing that just doesn't make sense to me at all whatsoever. That's just a commonplace now is like bailing out banks, right? Like there's no the people that run a bank, there's no risk. Why not just do the riskiest investments possible to try to make the most profits for your bank? Because if you fail, you'll just get bailed out. Right? Like there's no risk on their end at all whatsoever. It's
Yeah,
I don't know who would go out and, save a failing business. If I started up a company and bought a bunch of shit that just was pointless and I lost all the money, is the government going to come write me a check to save my company? No. They're
nope,
not, right? So why are we doing that for banks? Like obviously these people are mismanaging. I mean, fractional reserve banking is a whole nother topic, but yeah, I mean, it's just part of that. We're going to keep you safe. We're going to expand the economy. It's going to be great for everybody, and it's amazing if you hold assets, right? If you have multiple homes, if you had a bunch of stocks, like your assets went up a shit ton in value. You're sitting pretty. You're feeling great. But for anybody that is living paycheck to paycheck, doesn't have the means to save in assets, you're feeling pretty hurt. You're feeling the pain here, right? And it's all in the name of economic growth, right? The greater good.
yeah.
Right.
And the economic growth is in the name of getting reelected. So,
100%.
right, a lot of the time. So, yeah, man, a lot to unpack there, but we'll keep things moving into kind of like a brief history of money. And guys, I'll be straight with you here. Like learning about the history of money through hundreds of years is kind of boring, but it's one of those things that starts boring and it becomes a little more interesting as you go along because you really start to see the evolution of like how we ended up here. And, it all begins with like bartering systems like, hey, Alec, I want your car. So I'm going to trade you, I don't know, some
Couple
of my
cattle.
furniture for yes, a bunch of my furniture or something for your car. And it's like that fails pretty quickly, right? And so that system only worked in very small community settings. And it's like obviously if I can't go trade like a bunch of furniture for a home or something like that, right? It gets very incompatible. So this creates the need for a medium of exchange. So like a common denominator where I can exchange value between two otherwise unrelated goods, right? Essentially. And so the medium of exchange, the properties necessary for that, it needs to be easily divisible, right? So large amounts, small amounts, that part needs to be easy and it needs to be easily transferable. So now that we understand that, we can look at like through the years, what have we had as money? Shit, man, what haven't we had as money? We've had rhinestones, we've had African beads, we've had cattle, we've had copper, we've had salt, we've had silver, gold backed paper notes. And folks, that leads us directly to where we are today, fiat money, which is essentially paper notes, now digital, but dollars that are not backed by anything. Now, even just 60 years ago, dollars were backed by gold. They were tied to something, they were anchored to something. Today, it's free floating. Okay. So, kind of going from there, a number of these things have failed, and one has really prevailed. And the thing that's always prevailed, more or less, has been gold. So, we're going to talk for a minute about like why that is And we're going to kind of define the terms easy money and hard money. So, to go into that, easy money is a term that refers to, I mean, that's quite literally the definition. It's any type of currency that's easily produced at a low or zero cost with very little to no labor. That's our US dollar. Okay. The Fed literally wakes up in the morning and can add a zero to the balance sheet. It costs them nothing to do that. It costs no labor. It costs very little time. And it's certainly not hard to produce. Let's juxtapose that with gold. Gold is hard to produce. It's labor intensive. It requires a lot of resources, and gold is scarce and rare. And that's why it continually holds value through time. Okay. And then we mentioned a lot of other things. And throughout like hundreds of years, all of these things began, like rhinestones or beads, for example, they began in this method of creation that was very manual labor intensive and done by hand. And then technology came, right? Explosive technology came. You no longer had to chisel rhinestones. You could just blow up some rocks. And I'm dumbing this down a little bit, of course, right? But you could use technology that made the rhinestones much easier to accumulate, right? We saw this happen with the beads in Africa. Europeans came over. They had technology to create beads much, much faster, much cheaper, and they devalued the beads because they flooded essentially the quote unquote market with it. They were no longer scarce. They no longer held value. Now, again, and I guess copper is another example, but I think you guys get the point, right? And so once you understand like what hard money is versus easy money, we start to see like what a good store of value is. Alec, do you have anything you want to add to that, man?
Yeah, I actually have a visual of this. So I love to tie this to the African bead history, right? Like Europeans, they had the machinery to create these. I believe they were like glass beads, right? So they were able to make these in a much larger fashion and much more easily and cheaply. They bring them over, flood the market, right? So what I want to compare to this is essentially showing easy money with the US dollar, right? So this is the St. Louis Fed site showing it's called the M2. It's the money supply of dollars. So this is ranging not too far back, starting here 2007 or actually 2006. You see we're at about 7,000 billion dollars. So that's essentially 7 trillion, right? And you see this just steadily climb, climb, climb. We hit the 2008 financial crisis. It climbs a little bit faster as we start flooding more dollars into the market. We hit about 8.4 trillion. And then after that, you just see this thing start to keep going and going and going. Then bam, COVID hits, right? We're at 15 trillion in money supply. So it doubled from the span of 2007 to 2020, right? And then we're going from 15,000 all the way up, or excuse me, 15 trillion all the way up to 21.6 trillion, here in 2022. Just now we're starting to see some liquidity come out. They're removing some money from supply because the inflation has been so crazy. But this is the exact same thing that's been happening. So like an easy way to think about inflation, a lot of people don't think it's tied to like the Fed balance sheet and such here, but it's the same principle as the African beads. If I make a crap ton of these things, bring them over, and I can just buy all these goods, and it costed me close to nothing to produce the money to buy them, right? The same thing's happening here. So the government's producing all this money at zero cost because it is digital. The US dollar is mostly digital these days. It does cost to print paper bills, right? But when's the last time you used a paper bill? They're cutting down on that. A lot of places don't even take cash anymore. So kind of concludes that. So if they're just pumping all this money in at no cost, like goods are just getting grabbed left and right, right? The where this money goes first, it's really a top down effect. Outside of the stimmy checks, they sent this 1,200 bucks, great, but companies got billions of dollars. What we spend on war, billions of dollars, right? So all this money's going in to buy things, assets, real estate, stocks, and that's what causes stock market to rise, things like that, right? But it's really just provided from this free money. Your money's just being diluted. And I think if more people just understood this chart was out there, like this is you know the St. Louis Fed site, pull it up, take a look, even if you span back to like 1971 when we first came off the gold standard, like it's absolutely crazy the amount of money that has been created in the past 50 years. But most of it you'll see just happen recent, like the past 10 years, is a majority of the money supply that we're using today. It's wild. Any thoughts on the chart there? How's that make you feel?
It's insane, man. That's a great visual. I mean, I hate it. I hate seeing it, but it's a great visual. And again, like if you're ever tempted to blame a certain administration for this, I hear a lot right now of blame being placed on the Biden administration. And I have a lot of reason to dislike the Biden administration. I won't go too much into that, but that spike happened in 2020, right? So it all comes down to when the Fed decides we need to add or inject a bunch of money into the money supply. It's such a simple principle. And the verbiage that our politicians use, that our leadership uses, and the verbiage that the central banks use, it's like they make up new terms every day, man. It's so hard to follow. And that's why, up until this point, up until like my Bitcoin journey begins, I never bothered to look into this stuff. I just trusted it because I was like, holy shit, man, quantitative easy. What the fuck is that? Right? Like, dude, it just means money printing. This is simple economics. If a money becomes far less scarce overnight, it is less valuable overnight because humans value scarcity. And that's the difference between easy money and hard money. And that's the reason why gold will never be like something that loses value drastically, I should say. Its value fluctuates, of course, but it is a scarce, rare material, and it's always going to retain value because of that. And to that note, the gold standard brought forth the most prosperity the world has ever seen, straight up. And the reason we went to paper notes during the gold standard, paper notes were created because gold in a physical capacity is hard to move around, it's hard to divide. Even once you got like gold coins, it's very heavy, right? So it's not easily transferable. As we talked about before, a medium of exchange really does need to be easily transferable over long distances. And so smartly, people decided like, hey, we should print some paper notes that represent a certain chunk of the gold supply, and that worked fine until it didn't, and
Well,
it
we
didn't.
needed to pay
It,
for wars.
yep,
Nobody wants to give you
exactly,
gold to pay for your war.
exactly. And so the printing got out of control, and I think it comes back to a basic principle that's a little unfortunate, but we have to confront it. That human nature is, if we can control money, we are going to we're going to inflate it to benefit ourselves. That is
And
simply like what we do.
that's a super good point because it's not even like this nefarious thing like, oh, we want to, make everyone poor and put money in our pocket. Like, put yourself in that position. If you had the control to create money, and people want to stop world hunger, right? They want to help orphans, animals, whatever it may be. You would have a lot of temptation if I could just give $1 million to this orphanage. They're all going to have a great life. That's a great reason to create another $1 million, right? We're going to
Hmm.
help out so many people. So oftentimes, like, it's done with good intentions. It's not always like all the politicians are absolutely terrible people. It's this conspiracy theory. I do truly believe that they believe that they're doing it for the greater good. They're trying to do it for a good cause. I just think they're blind to the fact of what the effects are from it. Like, you
Hmm.
help one area, but you're taking from everyone else to do so. That you're doing some good here, but the negative effects are 10x of that. right? And no one sees that because it's in the background. They just feel good. We pass this bill, we're giving people health care, whatever it is, which is important, but it's at the expense of every other person, and it's the effects are just 100 times greater. That's the underlying issue here. And
Yeah. That's a great point, man. Because I think like it's very easy for us to get angsty, and there's a lot of like angst in the Bitcoin community, rightfully so. And I think at times, to be fair, it is nefarious, right? It all depends on the person, but you make a great point where like a lot of it comes with good intent. And I think even if we look back at our shitbag buddy from the clip you just played, right? He says it with such conviction. Yeah, we print money, but we're the U.S. government. It's almost as if he believes that yeah, we do it because we know what to do with it. We know that we're doing it for the right reasons. We know we're doing the right things with it. You crypto bros don't know shit. You're just fucking around. And so let us have this. Trust the system. And yeah, it's very easy to hate the guy, but you can see you can almost feel that's his line of thinking as he says that line, right? So great point there, dude.
absolutely
Uh,
100%.
So yeah, guys, like we'll kind of wrap this up here. We talked a lot now about the problems of money, and like this is all stuff that I really dove into. It's pretty simple stuff to explain. Don't second guess yourself if it feels too simple. It is. It really is. Okay? Where we're at now, I believe and the strong conviction in the Bitcoin community is we're at a place now where we're at a tipping point. You saw Alec's visual that he pulled up with the money supply expansion. Like, there's not a way to come back from that. And
Yeah.
this is like the initial stages of failure. Am I saying that the dollar is going to completely collapse in 10 years? I'm not saying that. We may not be alive when it collapses, but it sure as shit is devaluing. And if you're a millennial like me, you should strongly be questioning the integrity of your retirement account right now. I mean, my mom's like stressed about the social security check she's getting because the money she put away did not gain the value she thought it was going to. And I think I was telling you this story a few weeks ago, Alec, when we were hanging out. But like my mom, who's always been like, a pretty by the system person, was finally like, yeah, fuck all this. I don't know who to vote for anymore. They're all shitbags. They say whatever they need to get elected, and nobody's fixing the problem. And it's really sad. It's funny that she said it that way. If you've seen my mom, she's like the most like, she's this little old lady. But it's really sad that she's in her 60s and she's coming to this realization of like, what have I been putting my money away for my whole life? Because I'm struggling now, and shit, man, that sucks. So that's what we need to look at here.
Yeah, and don't be bashful. This is your call to action. You realize Bitcoin has been created. Like, get out there and freaking learn about money. Like, they don't teach you this shit in school. Go figure it out for your damn self. Especially if you're an adult, this is something you have to learn and understand. Use it on a every single day basis. Okay, go learn about money, whether you want to get into Bitcoin or not. That's gonna help every single person on the planet. Just understand money. It's going to change your perspective. You dive into the history of it, you're going to say, "Oh, okay, like these other monies failed and it looks a lot similar, to what we're doing today." So, what might just happen from that, right?
Yeah.
We might see some currencies fail if they're doing the same shit they were before and they failed, right?
Yeah.
And
It's never worked. It hasn't worked yet.
exactly. So,
History repeats itself.
to segue to Bitcoin, okay? Bitcoin is a possible solution for this, right? I'm not saying that, you know, Bitcoin's going to be used by every single person on the planet. It's going to replace every currency out there. In time, I do believe that. But right now, Bitcoin is an option to opt out of this system, right? It has a set of rules without a ruler. So you are choosing, hey, I agree with these rules. I'm going to join this network. I'm going to use this as money. And everyone else using Bitcoin agrees to the same thing, right? So it removes the need for any central authority to say, hey, We need to create more. We need to do this. We need to do that. We need to give some money to them, right? There's none of that. There's a rule set. You opt in, you save and hold Bitcoin. It's not going to change, right? The whole point of this episode was you're not going to change Bitcoin, but Bitcoin sure the hell is going to change you. It's going to send you down this rabbit hole to understand what money is, the history of it, and then have you realize, holy shit, what am I spending my money on? Where am I saving my money? Right? So it's just that option to remove yourself from the money printer. If I buy and hold one Bitcoin, there's only 21 million that will ever be created. Millions of them have been lost already, so it's even lower than that, but that are available. But I have one of 21 million, and that will never change. I have one US dollar of was it 26 trillion now. In 2010, it was 8 trillion, one of 8 trillion. So, I mean, tell me where you want to hold and store your value at. Somewhere
Yeah.
where they can add a zero to a balance sheet, or somewhere where it takes a massive amount of energy and computational power to generate the Bitcoin that is going to soon go to zero, right? There's not going to be more Bitcoin produced at a certain point in time. It's a long time down the road, but the what I was trying to get to through this rant is that Bitcoin is the option to opt out of this system. It is a potential solution, and as soon as you start looking into it, you're going to have all these realizations that we've been talking about this whole episode.
I love it, dude. I love the rant. I love the fieriness. That was beautiful. So, yeah, and guys, like we said earlier in the episode, this is going to be part of a series where we kind of walk us through the journey of understanding. And the next episode we put out, we'll go over some of these properties of Bitcoin that really showcase the way it is a hard asset. It's on an entirely fixed supply schedule. It's entirely decentralized. It cannot be controlled or manipulated by anybody ever. And I don't know what else to say. It is the opposite of the fiat system in every way. So when we talk about like assets to hedge against inflation, you hear those terms a lot. Hedge against inflation. Traditionally, every smart investor out there, will during times of high inflation, will go buy a bunch of gold or real estate or even like fine art, things that are like going to remain scarce and valuable because again, it all ties back to scarcity and rarity. That's where we find value in things that cannot be easily duplicated. And they'll go buy those things and put their money in that. They're not going to sit and hold millions or even billions of dollars in cash while the cash is being devalued, right? Like, duh. And so, what we see with Bitcoin is it's actually going to be the hardest asset ever because it's entirely fixed, right? More fine art can always be produced, more gold can be mined, not easily, and it's expensive, but there's more out there, right? There's probably some in the ocean we haven't tapped into yet.
Mhm.
There will never be 22 million Bitcoins to ever exist ever. There will be 21 and only 21 million. Okay. So I love where you were going with that, Alec. Guys, you don't even have to like start thinking of Bitcoin yet in terms of like, all right, I'm gonna fully abandon the fiat system and get on a Bitcoin standard. You need to understand that this is protecting your monetary value by putting your money, by transferring some US dollars or whatever your currency may be into Bitcoin because fiat inflates, it's inflatable, and it's being devalued all the time. And Bitcoin is mathematically designed to become more and more scarce with time. And that's what we're going to talk about next time on Today I Learned Bitcoin. I can't wait, dude. I'm hyped.
Thank you guys so much for joining us today and listening. We're extremely excited to create the next part where we dive deeper into Bitcoin. We do also have a guest we're about to bring on to discuss some beginner topics around Bitcoin. So super excited for that as well. Please like, subscribe, help us beat these algorithms, help spread the show. If you're a Bitcoiner, share this with your normie friends. If you are just curious about Bitcoin, keep listening. Save this, share it with friends and family. If you've been feeling the the pains of your money decreasing, if are just frustrated that you can't buy a house, if you're frustrated that the fucking strawberries at the grocery store are $10, you know, keep listening for this next episode on Bitcoin, and you're going to start to understand there is a solution, and it's beautiful. It's here. It's going to change the world. Right. So thank you so much, guys. Till next time. We'll see ya.